This episode is brought to you by Self-Care for Diabetes, a virtual online program that's doing diabetes care differently.
We don't tell you to lose weight. Instead, we help you create positive and meaningful changes that make your life with diabetes better than before. Visit selfcareforddiabetes.com to learn more.
Hey, Glenys, what's going on?
Hey, Rebecca. I am so excited to be here with you again.
Yes, and I'm excited to talk about blood sugars.
Yes. Yes, we want to talk about blood sugars and diabetes today because it's just such a big place of confusion for people, and I'm excited to help, and I know you are too.
Yeah. I mean, anytime we could bring back freedom to ice cream and desserts and that the dreaded sugar, and yes, we want to be aware of eating patterns, etc. But it's this idea, it's almost like if you look at a dessert and you have diabetes, that you're just toast. And it causes a lot of stress and anxiety for people. The more live chats we do with our group members for Self-Care for Diabetes, it's really clear, especially early on in diabetes diagnosis, that understanding blood sugars and checking them, what to do when, or even, deciding not to check them, cutting back, making a different plan. It's just such a significant source of anxiety, and it really does not have to be.
Right. It's checking blood sugars. We want it to be a tool for people to help them manage their diabetes. And I think what's happening is people are just getting super stressed out. It's leading to that shame spiral, and then they just become paralyzed. And then it's sort of like, I can't do anything, and it's not helpful. So I thought we could share some of the most common myths and facts about blood sugars. But first, let's start with clearing up the connection between blood sugars and diabetes, and why we're checking and what's going on. So I think would be helpful maybe if we talk about what happens to your blood sugars with diabetes for people who are sort of new to this.
Sure.
And why we want to know what's going on with them. So in somebody without diabetes, your cells just take in the sugar that comes in through food, primarily carbohydrate, and it, goes through that. I'm thinking back to our dietetic education days. We have to learn the terrible cycles.
Way back.
Oh my God. That I've all forgotten, had to draw reactions, but basically that glucose goes through a little pathway and it eventually produces energy for your body. So basically what happens in somebody without diabetes, your blood sugars go through that glycolysis cycle that, we had to learn about and memorize and have since forgotten, but basically in our dietetic days, school days, and it basically goes through and it produces energy for your body to use and for your muscles to use and for, everything to happen in your body. You need energy, and it comes primarily from the carbohydrates and the glucose that your body extracts from those carbohydrates. And normally there's no problem. Somebody without diabetes, they just use the sugar that they need. Whatever is not used gets stored for later use. And then in somebody with diabetes, what happens is the cells become a little bit resistant to the insulin that takes the glucose in or helps the glucose to get in. Sort of a lock and key analysis that people like to use. I don't know that it's perfectly inaccurate. Oh my God, bust. Sorry, what am I trying to say? Not analysis. Analogy.
Analogous, maybe?
Analogy to...
Okay.
So in somebody with diabetes, what happens is the glucose has a hard time getting into the cells. So the cells become a little bit resistant to the insulin that helps the glucose get into the cells. And then that sugar just starts wandering around in your bloodstream. And that's where it starts to cause some problems. And so that's what taking your blood sugar helps you determine, how much blood sugar is wandering around in your bloodstream. And what happens is if too much is there over a long term, that sugar can start to do damage to those little tiny vessels, at the sort of in fingers and toes and feet and kidneys and that kind of thing. So that's why those things become a little bit at risk with constantly high blood sugars. And so that's what happens over time. And so checking your blood sugars after that very complicated sort of description of what I've just said here is taking your blood sugar is going to help you determine if you've got just a little too much blood sugar wandering around. And that's what's going to help you manage your care and make decisions about self-care and eating and exercise and what needs to happen in your life. Or medications come in and help take care of that blood sugar and help it get into the cells.
No, that's a really great explanation. And it brings me to the first myth that I would like you to help, to bust. And, I think it's this idea that there's, even without taking the blood sugar reading, there's that fear of, oh, what's it going to be? I know it's going to be high, so somebody wakes up and has breakfast and it's a egg and cheese bagel with some fruit or something like that, maybe it's a yogurt parfait with granola or something, but just like gets up, has breakfast. You need morning energy, right? But it's like, oh my gosh, what should I eat to not have a high reading? What can I eat? It's almost in this fear, anxiety of what's safe or not safe. And say no matter what, they go ahead and they do the reading, the postprandial reading, or, I guess we could come up with really any scenario where they finally work it up to do the reading and it looks high. It's like, oh my gosh, it's high. This is a high blood sugar reading and having this is bad, right? So it's really this context of they decided to check, they got a high reading, and that next, it's almost like my fear came true and this is bad, almost like it's a catastrophizing. And I just think blanketly there's this belief that, oh, if I get a high reading, it's bad. And I wondered if you could sort of help address that for us. I mean, is this true that having a high blood sugar reading is bad?
Right. I think the problem is we're looking at one data point, and it's not enough information to say whether your diabetes is being well controlled or if it needs more help with control. Your blood sugars need more help with being controlled. And I just don't think one bad reading is enough to give you a lot of good information. It's really just a data point. And I think the thing is, people look at that and they think, well, now for the rest of the day, I have to do something different. And I think it's more useful to take that data point and look back and say, okay, well, what was going on? How was that meal for me? What was the meal mix like? Readings are going to vary based on the time of the meal, what's going on with your stress, sleep, movement, all of that. And so it's just one reading. And people really go into a shame spiral over one bad reading, and then it makes them not want to check again. And I think the way we want to look at that is we really need a bunch of data points before we can see what's going on. We really need to see trends in blood sugars to know what's going on, rather than that one focusing on that, oh, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? So much anxiety before checking, and then so much shame after if it wasn't like what you had hoped or the perfect reading. And instead, I think what's more useful is thinking about it in terms of, I'm going to collect some data points, and maybe at this time I'm not ready to make changes, or maybe I am, but I really need to see more information. And so just one data point is not the place where you want to stop and go into the shame spiral.
Yeah. It's, I think, I mean, even thinking about the idea of the word bad, right? Oh, I got a bad reading. It's not that hard to jump from that, the reading is bad, to I am bad. I mean, and now you're in shame, right? And that's why there's a whole module, and we had our earlier podcast on that. So we'll make sure that you get that in the notes for today's episode, so that if you haven't heard us talk about shame and its role, but you make sure you get that information too. And I really like what you're talking about. It's almost like a curiosity. Is this helpful to get some trends and patterns? So in my example where I talked about just different breakfasts, right? Like, you might see that no matter what you eat in the mornings, that you tend to get this blood sugar reading and it's higher than you would like, or you wish it were lower. But in the end, you're eating breakfast, you're eating things you like, it's giving you energy, you're enjoying it. And it's almost like even, like you're just not noticing enough of a difference in your readings, that it's not really about the food or meal mix changes. Like we've seen that. We've seen, folks in our group who were noticing that like there was just a difference in having bagels in the morning versus a bagel sandwich at lunch. And it's just a different time of day. And there was nothing else that we could decipher. It really wasn't the bagel. It was like what was going on like with the body and at different blood sugars for different times of day. And I remember that person too also wasn't really getting enough protein. And so when we talked about make an adjustment to the meal mix, this idea of adding in, which a lot of our participants are like, wait, aren't we always supposed to be cutting back? But the adding in actually also made a difference.
Yeah. And I think the piece that people really forget about is stress level. So I'm thinking of one client who told me, I eat this meal when I'm not working and my blood sugars are within range. I eat it when I'm working and they're way above range.
Sky high.
It's the same meal.
It's your job.
It is. And this person had a very high stress job. And the truth is stress is going to make a big difference in your blood sugar. So all of those things are going to come together. And I think people just focus on like, it's just the food. I've done something wrong with the food. And, we want to draw out and have a bigger sort of picture.
Yeah. And we have a lot of modules in our program on food. And I know we're going to do a podcast chat on it. So we'll be able to get into a lot more detail. But generally speaking, if you're thinking about food, food ideas, it's like, if you see it as an experiment and say, oh, I think I could like it like this. It reminds me of a client who they had family, like Taco Tuesday, right? And they always went out and just, she was tracking and getting these high readings and, doing intuitive eating, but also having diabetes concerns, and just came up on her own about what she enjoyed the most, and just had this idea of, I really want to have, chips and salsa as part of the meal. But when we do fajitas and stuff, I really feel like I could enjoy a lot of the stuff that's on the inside. And like, I want to see what it's like if I don't do the tortillas. And again, I was not advising that. That was an idea of an experiment. And she just said, yeah, it was a difference in the reading. But the thing is, I enjoyed the food just as much. And so what the person decided was, just let me decide what I want to do, on the Taco Tuesdays. Like, so it ended up being a flexible approach. Like, it wasn't never have those tortillas again. Right. And it was more like, I could use this as information. And if I wanted fajitas with tortillas, it's like, I could choose not to check because I can assume that it might be a little bit higher, and that's okay because of trends. Or I could do it and check. And if it's higher, it's not surprising. I don't need to do anything, out of fear, that really isn't in line with self-care. So I just think that's another really good example of sort of trying to let yourself know numbers and trends and things, but without kind of spilling into sort of a chaotic response, because all that stress alone, and as you just said, right, all that stress is going to spike them anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's our second big myth?
Yeah. Well, I would love for us to address this idea that it's kind of like, what do I do first? And it has to do with meds, right? This idea that you have to do diet and exercise, right, before meds, right? Or even the more flexible term we hear now, right, lifestyle changes. I mean, whether it's the prescription ads that I catch, or when we hear people who've just come, from their doctor and their diagnosis, it seems to be that this approach, or a chat room, a family member, oh, well, you've got to make your changes first, diet and exercise first. And it's a specific myth that it must come before meds. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that really leans on this idea that you brought diabetes on yourself and now you alone have to fix it, and forget about meds first, right? Really, you need to see if you can fix it. And that is absolutely fine if somebody wants to go that route. If they think, well, I'd like to try I really hate the word lifestyle changes, the way it's been co-opted by diet culture, right? But,
right.
True lifestyle changes maybe looking at the meal mix, maybe looking at your overall patterns of eating, and not talking about restriction or deprivation, just talking about, oh, could I add foods in that could be helpful? And looking at exercise. And I think that's fine if somebody really wants to go that route. And I think sometimes people choose that route out of shame. When, if somebody's really grappling with disordered eating, because they were immersed in diet culture for a long time, and that lifestyle change route isn't going to be that easy initially, because there's still diet mindset going on. Maybe there's overeating as a result of long-term restriction. Maybe medication is going to give you a little breathing space to do that work to heal your relationship with eating and with food. And that's okay too, to go the medication route. And I think that what I would love to see is that people don't feel shame about either, whatever choice is involved, that it really comes out of a sort of a positive spiral up kind of situation where it's like, oh, this is maybe my opportunity to look at, are there ways to take care of myself differently? Or, you know what, I think I need some help with medication right now, and that's okay. It's that stigma piece around getting diabetes that really throws a monkey wrench in that decision making, I think. And we're just so socialized to believe that like our bad habits cause diabetes, and that's not false. That's a complicated diagnosis and condition to get, and it's way beyond bad habits. I hate too much sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll just speak from my perspective. Like as a daughter, I've been helping my mom with her diabetes concerns for well over a decade. And she had an eating disorder history that went undiagnosed for most of her life. And, but when she first got her diabetes diagnosis, she was on a certain amount of meds, like a certain, types of meds and a certain pattern. And we went with that right away. And then we were able to work on stresses, anxieties, and her mental health and take workable, flexible changes that she could build. And she'd go back in and they would look at, we think we can experiment with getting rid of this med, and then we'd keep the habit changes going. And she was able to stop one med because she was getting different highs and lows. And it would work for a while, but then it didn't work because things can change. And we've also seen in our groups people would talk about that they were experiencing, changes to their medications, and, they felt good about it. And I think that it's a good and a reasonable thing too. So it's maybe as you're starting out and you're opening your mind to meds, and again, there's fear about, is this something I'll be taking forever or whatnot? The truth is, in the beginning, you don't really know. And so it's remembering that meds work and they can help you feel better. And meds do also have side effects, and you might not like those side effects. And so I think if you remember that it's your choice what to do first, second, or both at the same time, right? It's about non-judgment and stepping outside of shame, and knowing that you always get to choose next steps, and that if with time and good mental health support and other really positive things, there becomes really positive medical related reasons to make a change to the med plan, that's a medical adjustment that just went along with where you're at in your diabetes journey. And I would say the other aspect goes with over time, if there does become a reason to increase a med, that also is not a personal failing. But at the end of the day, this idea that there's a set strategy for what is success for diabetes concerns the way meds go, I just think that's total BS.
Right. Yeah. I mean, diabetes is a progressive condition, and more meds may be needed over time, or different meds. And there's no shame in that. And that is just the nature of diabetes. And,
right.
The medications can just be a part of your self-care plan.
Yeah. And even I love the idea of like different meds, because with time, new meds are created. And certainly we know that there's sort of the business of it. And I'm not trying to open, because we want affordable and accessible medications too. But also it's like, People need to be working on the best meds for diabetes concerns because, as we said, it's not, individuals don't cause diabetes. It's a complicated, we know there's genetic factors, and with time, meds should get better and better and better. And that's not your burden to hold. You do what you can, you make, as smart as you can self-care choices, and, you feel validated in your decisions and that you have a good support system in place too. Yeah. All right. One more myth to go. And I would love to discuss with you this idea that you should check your blood sugars often to have the best control of your blood sugars.
Right. And I think neither one of us are here to say how often you should check your blood sugars, just to be clear on that this is a plan that you want to make with your healthcare provider, first of all. But what you need is, above all, a reasonable and realistic plan to check, and that it can be flexible. And, we show you how to sort of create that flexible program for yourself. We're not telling you, do it this time and this time and this time. This is about you sort of deciding what is realistic for you and what's helpful for you. And then, again, working with your healthcare provider on what data they need to. And, we're looking again at a plan that can give you some data on trends and help you follow the trends that you see. Things like making decisions on things like CGM, continuous glucose monitor, that I have clients that do that. We have many people in our groups that, use those instead of, having to do the individual checks, and that's taken the stress out of checking for a lot of people and giving them some really good information. And that is, whether to check or not also depends on, the medication you're on. In the place that I worked a few years ago, when somebody was newly diagnosed with diabetes, this was just their particular protocol. They didn't have people checking blood sugars. Other places will have people checking morning blood sugars to give an idea of, is the medication working? So it really just depends on, again, what information your healthcare provider wants, what information you need and find helpful. And I think it doesn't have to be this all the time situation that is creating stress. And I see that people who have sort of not had any input on how they do it are the most stressed about it. So really just having that agency of choosing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think the key word is helpful. Right. And the way you figure out what is a helpful plan is by, coming up with a realistic one for you and trying it out, like a little experiment, and question, hey, how is this helpful? How is this helping me? Maybe you approach your checking with curiosity and compassion. If ever you feel lost and confused on that, I always say, hey, imagine you're advising a friend. Act like that. Oh yeah. I know you so we all have that wisdom of how we should be approaching, the readings and things like that. But it is harder when it's for yourself. So you can hold compassion that it's a difficult, you're having a difficult experience with your blood sugars, but actually by acknowledging that, focusing on helpfulness of a plan and experimenting and giving yourself, kind of reducing the urgency and giving yourself some time to collaborate and connect with others, you'll actually have so much less stress and anxiety about it. You will find that workable plan, and that's a workable plan for now, and things could change. We've certainly helped people who had the anxiety. They felt like it seemed to be over checking, and they weren't even, we'd ask, what was the doctor recommendation? It's like not even collaborating with their doctor, their, outpatient dietitian specifically on a plan yet. It's like, well, let's focus on that first, come up with a plan, and make it a lot less random. And then sure enough, like a lot of people, just their checking went down. They found that they were actually able to use it as a neutral piece of data. And we've even had people that have decided to stop for periods of time for a lot of different reasons. Just they needed their focused attention elsewhere. People take in trips and just like, yeah, maybe I don't need to check for several days. I think I just think if you're hearing or feeling like, okay, you don't have your CGM or you're not considering that or whatnot. And it's like, you're in this mode of like, you urgently have to know what the reading is in order to take the next decision. That is checking anxiety, and you got to deal with the anxiety first before you can actually trust what's going to come out of your readings plan.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
Any closing tips or anything for us? Any recent news around checking? Any other strategies that we missed?
I think the one thing I get various diabetes journals, and the one thing I was sort of excited to see for people with who are using a CGM. I have clients and we have people in group who will say things like, "Oh, I'm looking at my CGM and it's freaking me out, and every time I see I'm like, well, that's taking your blood sugar constantly. So if you're looking at it constantly, that is going to be pretty stressful." And then what happens is they get their sort of analysis of what's going on, and they go, "Oh, it wasn't that bad," because what we're looking at is time and range, and that's what healthcare practitioners might be looking at. And so this sort of time and range to help determine if you're controlling your blood sugar is being used now more than just that A1C number. So people get really focused on the A1C, but now, especially for people with the CGM, they are also looking at time and range. And so there are very specific sort of times in range that kind of tell people or tell your healthcare practitioners if you're doing pretty well. And instead of sort of looking constantly at that and freaking out, my advice is to say, like, maybe pick some time of days, to say, okay, why do I want to look at this? Oh, I want to evaluate that meal mix, and look at it then. But otherwise, you might want to look away a little bit. Yeah. Because that time and range is going to surprise you, I think, when it comes in. I've had clients like, oh, I saw my sugars go up, and then, oh, but my time and range actually was pretty good. Oh, so going back to that one bad blood sugar reading, it's not telling you everything. And just, focusing back on the shame piece and go back to that podcast that we did. And that's why we just have such a huge focus on in our program on that. Go back to reducing the shame around this, because it's not your fault.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, that we're finishing up around this, but having talked about CGM, I wanted to bring up just really quickly, if you do not have diabetes, okay, you have no diabetes diagnosis, should you be buying and using a CGM?
My advice is no. Because
why I'm asking, right?
Because we have people that have done that. Well, I know people that have, like, I need to check my blood sugars, and it's like, but you don't have diabetes.
Yeah, well, they're advertising it now on Facebook. It's like a 20-year-old thin person, it's like a diet culture thing now. Look, it's a 2-step insertion and and it's, of course, it's going to be out of pocket. It is, but yeah, they're advertising CGMs not for diabetes care, but just, because you need to watch this, you need to track that. It's like, I don't know, that people thought they suddenly needed a Fitbit and every step needed to be monitored, right? Well, that makes however billions of dollars. And so now let's try to sell people this. But, it's CGMs are wonderful tools and might be a good fit for people who have diabetes to get that data. But just because, it's a podcast and folks are listening, and I just thought people might ask, oh, I've seen this. Is this a good idea, whether it's prevention or a good awareness help? I mean, would you say that people who don't have diabetes should get one? And
that is 100% diet culture, right? The idea that the body and all its functions have to be tracked constantly by, your Fitbit or your Apple Watch or now it's blood sugar. I mean, I can't think of anything more stressful than somebody who doesn't have diabetes and is checking this and wondering it with every reading or with every data point that shows up. Oh, do I have diabetes now? Where it's like, well, does that run in your family? Is there any indicator for you that you might have, and it just, that to me sounds like another piece of diet culture coming in. Right. So I would not even recommend a CGM for somebody with pre-diabetes, but that's, right. That's me. I'm not a doctor. So, but I'm not seeing doctors recommend that for people with pre-diabetes. And often they don't recommend it for people who are newly diagnosed with diabetes. Right. Depending, I just would say absolutely not for people with no diabetes. Like that save your money.
Right.
And stress.
Right. I know, because I'm just even thinking about that sort of too much misinformation, right? Like I actually want my blood sugars to be higher after I've eaten a full meal, because that tells me that my body is about to get energy that it needs to function. So I want them to go up and I want them to go back down. And I could just see, I had some carrots and I heard there was sugar in carrot. All of a sudden, it could get really extreme. So just in case you hear anyone saying, this, that, or the other thing, I think that back to that question of helpfulness. So CGMs, unfortunately, if it's a Facebook ad and it's saying you need this and it's not specific for diabetes care, that is diet culture. CGMs, you're talking to your doctor about it, data, and that this is a way to sort of get trends. And like you said, that could be helpful without having to have that solid plan in place and change it up and everything like that. But just because you have data doesn't mean you should always look at the data. Again, there's a workable plan for interpreting that data. So
well, that's frustrating, because what I really want the focus to be on is having more insurance coverage for different kinds of CGMs, because
there we go.
Not every insurance company covers the newest one or ones with alarms that give you so that, to me, that's the concern. Let's not buy into this. Everybody needs a CGM. It's like, no, but all these insurance companies need to cover all the good CGMs, So
right. It's a good point. You need to get them in the hands of people who need it. And we should not have, we have so much inequity in healthcare. So, Medicare, Medicaid, insurance programs, we should be giving people these tools that will help them better care for themselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, on that note, I guess we're done chatting about that, and welcome folks into the program if you'd like. Our next live call will be starting soon, and we love meeting our folks and chatting and answering questions, and it will be like listening to us in the podcast, except you get to talk to us directly. How fun is that?
Woohoo! It's fun.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.